Recently, the United States announced that it would go as far as American interests required in its operation against Iran. Since the beginning of the U.S.-Israeli strikes on Iran, hundreds of civilians have already been killed, including children, as you have already said, Sergei Viktorovich. So I have the following question. Do you think any sanctions can be expected? And is the UN able to stop Western aggression in the Middle East? Sanctions should not be expected. As far as I can tell, no one will impose unilateral sanctions against the United States. We, the Russian Federation, are not in principle supporters of methods that undermine international economic and other relations. Contrary to the Charter of the United Nations, it's just not our method. We never resort to such things. But as for the rest of the countries, I just don't see any interest in using this resource, which is used exclusively by the West itself, primarily by the United States. But lately the European Union has been doing it more and more. Your colleagues in the public space have repeatedly asked how the International Paralympic Committee will behave now. For example, whether it will have any decisions or not. The Olympic Committee and other federations that conduct sports competitions. Well, there is no answer. And obviously no one would dare to resort to such steps. I believe that this is a reflection of profound changes as well as profound problems in world politics and the global economy. The United States explicitly declares, and President Trump does not hesitate to say this, that they will not be guided by any UN principles, that they will be guided only by the interests of their state. My colleague Marco Rubio says the same thing. As well as Minister of War Hegseth regularly carries out the same idea. As for Iran, Rubio, responding to a reporter's question, recently suggested that the United States would govern Iran, just as they announced that they would govern Venezuela. Now they are trying on a similar scheme for Cuba as well. Well, it's probably not the end. Yes, Palestine, of course, is Trump's plan, which the Arab countries have expressed their willingness to support. And the People's Republic of China and I have not objected to in the UN Security Council. But this plan also does not involve the implementation of the UN decisions on the creation of two states, Israel and Palestine. The State of Israel has been created, and it is behaving quite actively, as you can see, but there is no Palestinian state. And every day, even the theoretical possibility of its creation disappears. Because 90% of the territories in the West Bank are occupied by illegal settlements. Everything in the Gaza Strip has been destroyed. And any plans are being discussed except for the Palestinians to be the owners there. Going back to what the UN can do. On our initiative with the People's Republic of China, immediately on the day of the outbreak of aggression, we convened a meeting of the UN Security Council, where fundamental assessments were made. And I believe that this is the maximum possible in those conditions. The United States, as permanent members of the Security Council, will certainly not allow any decisions to be taken that contradict their interests, as they see them, as well as two other Western members of the UN Security Council, France and Britain. They are trying to distance themselves from what Washington is doing. And even President Trump has publicly criticized Prime Minister Starmer for not providing military support to the actions of the United States. But in general, both Paris and London, of course, will never encroach on what the United States is doing now. I think it's not only and not so much about this crisis. As I said at the beginning, this is a reflection of the deepest problems that have now come to the surface and which consist, first of all, In the clash of international law and the absence of international law, as it was, say, in the 19th century, before certain understandings were reached following the results of the First World War, and then, following the results of the World War II, the UN Charter was adopted, and the United Nations Organization was created. Now this is no longer an argument in discussions from the point of view of the United States. As I said, they openly talk about it. And it seems to me that such discussions are still necessary. From my contacts with Marco Rubio, and from the contacts that President Putin had with President Trump, we still got the impression that Americans, at least, want their national interests to be understood and respected. And in return, they will understand and respect the national interests of other great powers. At least great powers. And such an understanding was constantly present. So we have a dialogue with our American colleagues at different levels, in different formats, on individual crises, on certain areas of our relations. But I have no doubt that a principled, comprehensive conversation has matured about how the United States sees the world, how it sees itself in this world, and what role it assigns to everyone else. This is especially true for nuclear powers, for obvious reasons, and you can't do without such a conversation. President Putin once proposed holding a summit of the 5 nuclear weapon states, the permanent members of the UN Security Council, and this initiative remains fully relevant. The conversation has been overdue for a long time. I would even say that such a question has long been overripe. And I hope that the Trump administration understands this, and they will be ready for such a serious conversation. Sergei Viktorovich, we covered the Geneva talks, meaning the trilateral talks between the United States, Russia, and Ukraine. I understand that negotiations like silence. But still, is there any progress according to your feelings? According to your information? Is there an attempt by the Americans to push through this territorial issue? And in connection with this Middle East situation, how will it affect the course of negotiations on Ukraine and the choice of a venue for them? As for the position of the United States, we have repeatedly commented on it. We positively noted the fundamental difference between this position and the Russophobic, pro-Ukrainian, pro-Nazi obstinacy of the Europeans. Since President Trump, unlike the Biden administration, immediately in his first assessments of the situation in Ukraine, named the involvement of the Kyiv regime in NATO as one of the reasons. He called for once and for all to forget about Ukraine's membership in the North Atlantic Alliance. And secondly, he called for recognizing the realities on the ground. These realities, I want to say again, are not about the territorial issue. The realities on the ground reflect the opinion of people living in the relevant territories, whom the Kyiv regime, which illegally came to power, regarded as terrorists. They called them creatures, inhumans, whose language, culture, religion, traditions the Kyiv regime legally prohibited. And the people living on these lands have spoken out in referendums about how they want to further shape their future as part of the Russian Federation. And in this sense, there is a territorial issue. It is necessary to proceed from the opinion of people. Both President Trump and his team have recognized that these are the realities that have developed on the ground, and these realities must also be recognized within the framework of the settlement. I won't go into details, but the fact that these positions, the positions of the Trump administration that I have outlined, remain. I can admit, and I can confirm this. In fact, they were fixed in the understanding of anchorage. Now many people are talking about the spirit of anchorage, which is now evaporating. Then evaporating. It is necessary to talk not about the spirit. The atmosphere always helps. But understandings were reached in anchorage. It's not something ephemeral. These are very specific things. And, as I have said more than once, It is precisely with these understandings that the Trump administration is trying to bring down their European allies and, of course, the Nazi Zelensky regime. But as far as we can tell, the Trump administration is not moving away from these understandings, from the problem of Ukraine's non-accession to NATO, and from the need to recognize the realities that have developed on the ground as a result of people's will. Another thing is that the Europeans are imposing, probably they are publicly saying about it, that the core of the settlement is the guarantee of security to Ukraine. At the same time, they are referring to security guarantees for the regime that currently rules in Kiev. And these are guarantees to the regime, which they want to preserve by all means in those territories that will remain from the former Ukrainian state. At the same time, they state that it is necessary to guarantee the security of this regime primarily because this regime defends European values and opposes the aggressor represented by Russia. In other words, they want to guarantee the safety of the Nazi, Russophobic regime, the racists who have settled in power there through corruption, through encouragement from European brothers and sisters, and they are doing the work that those very Europeans have planned against us. And this is one of the fundamental problems, because the security guarantees that the Ukrainians offered in April 2022, I want to remind you once again, and with which we agreed, those guarantees were collective. And this was a guarantee of security not only for one participant in the process, but it was a guarantee of security for all. And these guarantees were provided by the principle of indivisibility of security. According to the Ukrainian proposal, which we supported, the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, plus Turkey, plus Germany, were responsible for this. Decisions among this group of security guarantors would be made by consensus. And according to this agreement, proposed by the Ukrainians themselves, there should be no foreign military bases in Ukraine. There should be no foreign troops, no military exercises with the participation of foreign troops. Compare this with what they are saying now. As soon as the fighting ends, according to the West, troops will be deployed there as part of the provision of security guarantees to Ukraine. This topic has not been worked out at all, and it needs to be discussed publicly, because it is absolutely unacceptable for us, as you understand, to preserve a long Nazified and militarized Ukraine. This directly contradicts the objectives of the special military operation, and agreeing to a cessation of hostilities in conditions where it includes the preservation of our enemy, armed by Europe, an enemy, that Europe is aiming at a new war against Russia. Well, it probably directly contradicts our interests and common sense. Sergei Viktorovich, how serious do you think the threat to global nuclear security is today in connection with the conflict in the Middle East? Well, I would say that this threat is escalating. It is growing. I have already mentioned that the main reason for launching this aggressive attack on Iran was announced by the United States because of its belief that Iran is making a nuclear bomb. Although it seems that in June, after that 12-day war, the United States announced that all components and all work on Iran's creation of a nuclear bomb had been destroyed. But this war, according to the quote I quoted from Stephen Witkoff, really began in order to deprive Iran of its inalienable right to enrich uranium for peaceful purposes. All other countries of the world have this right. And if this logic continues now, then I guarantee you that forces will appear in Iran Influential movements will appear in order to do exactly what the United States wants to avoid, which is to acquire a nuclear bomb, because the United States does not attack those who have nuclear bombs. And there are people there who cite the example of Muammar Gaddafi. He voluntarily abandoned the nuclear weapons development program. And some of our interlocutors from the countries of the global south remind us of this. You see, Gaddafi refused to build a nuclear bomb, and that's what they did to him. And those who have not refused, no one attacks them. So, this action, this war, that the United States has now unleashed against Iran, can stimulate the movement in favor of creating nuclear weapons. And not only in Iran. Such a movement will immediately appear in the Arab countries that are neighboring the Islamic Republic of Iran. Therefore, outwardly paradoxically, the noble goal declared by the United States to start a war in order to prevent the proliferation of nuclear weapons can stimulate completely opposite trends. And in Europe, everything is unfolding in an interesting way. Macron has now launched another initiative on the nuclear deterrence program. Well, he said that France was significantly increasing its nuclear forces. He would not give any statistics to maintain uncertainty, but France would build new carriers, missiles, and aircraft carriers. He invites those who wish to join his French nuclear umbrella. Even Denmark seems to be ready there, and Germany is ready. Well, Britain, there's no place without it in these matters. Therefore, there is now a growing risk that the problem of nuclear proliferation will begin to spiral out of control. In Europe, they talk about it openly and loudly. There are also alarming trends in Northeast Asia, where the United States, together with South Korea, are introducing nuclear components into the program of these exercises. And speaking of Macron's initiative, let's not forget that he made this announcement about the creation of a nuclear deterrent program or potential in order, as he put it, to manage escalation. And Macron said that Paris intends to use nuclear weapons in order to protect its vital interests. And he added that these interests are not limited to the borders of France. This is also an interesting topic to think about. It was said by him just yesterday. I am sure that comments on this statement will come from a wide variety of political science, academic, and government circles. We will continue to defend the principles of non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. We will categorically oppose actions that could undermine these principles and provoke a nuclear arms race. In this regard, I would like to remind you once again about the President's initiative, which he put forward a few years ago. Then it was prevented by an epidemic, a pandemic. This is an initiative to convene a summit of the permanent members of the UN Security Council. The situation is becoming too serious to postpone this initiative indefinitely. Dear friends, I kindly ask you to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Thank you.